Greetings everybody and welcome on this session of the Soulmate Within Summit. My name is Shakti, I'm your host, and I'm very excited to have with me today Nilima Bhat, who is coming to us from the heart of Mumbai, the buzzing metropolis of life in India. Welcome Nilima, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Shakti. I can already feel the wonderful connections. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Beautiful. So the topic that Nilima will be speaking about today is Shakti Shiva in leadership, and I'm very thrilled that we have somebody with Nilima's expertise to focus on the dance between Shiva, which is the masculine principle, and Shakti, the feminine principle, in the context of leadership. Much of what we've been exploring in the summit has been looking at this relationship between the masculine and the feminine in our personal lives, in our relationship lives, and Nilima now also just brings in here the context of leadership in the many different facets where we would take this relationship into the world. And as you'll see in a moment, she has quite a rich background in working in the world of business and holistic health, where she's practiced leadership. And thus, this has also become the theme of the book which she's co-authoring, which will be released around about the time of the summit. And the book is called Shakti Leadership. And she is co-authoring this with Raj Sisodia, the best-selling co-author of Conscious Capitalism. Nilima is also the co-author of My Cancerous Knee, The Journey of Illness into Wholeness. And she is the director of Roots and Wings, a leadership consultancy, and founder of Sampurna, the wholeness practice. She facilitates personal transformation, gender reconciliation, and diversity and inclusion in the workplace. She has 24+ years of global corporate experience and consciousness-based health and growth training. Her particular expertise is in developing body intelligence and spiritual intelligence. Nilima is also a Shivananda yoga teacher and has taken up the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. She's a dancer and choreographer and co-founder of a dance company that's called Sri Shakti that endeavors to demystify Indian dance and spiritual sciences for international audiences. I want to also just say a bit about Nilima's book that she's co-authoring, Shakti Leadership, because it really introduces the theme that we'll be speaking about today. And they say about the book, our current one-sided notion of a leader's power is the root cause of a host of contemporary problems, including social breakdown, environmental degradation, an epidemic of depression and corruption in business and government. Whether we're male, female, or transgender, we've been trained to value leadership qualities that are traditionally thought of as masculine, hierarchical, individualistic, and militaristic. Reaching into ancient spiritual and mythical teachings, Nilima and Raj revived the feminine archetype of leadership, which is generative, cooperative, creative, and empathetic. In the Indian yogic tradition, these qualities are associated with Shakti, the source of creation, sustenance, and transformation that powers the cycle of life. In the book, the authors seek to restore a long-lost balance for all genders alike of masculine and feminine energies, which is the theme we'll be speaking about today. All leaders should learn to value and understand Shakti leadership, acting from a consciousness of life-giving creativity and sustainability to achieve self-mastery and be of selfless service. When leaders of all sexes return to embrace this mindset, we can restore sanity, elevate humanity, and heal the planet by evolving consciously together. So, Nilima, I was just so excited and thrilled to hear about this book that you are bringing into the world, clearly based on your own commitment, spiritual commitment, the practice of a lifetime of dedication in work. And so I'm excited to have you share with us your understanding of why finding and working with a soulmate within is critical for a leader in these times. And you said in your write-up that the person you are is the leader that you are. A whole person is a whole leader, capable of being soft and strong, caring and clear. So I want to begin this interview by just asking you to tell us about your understanding of Shiva and Shakti's union within, and also just maybe introducing the context, the concepts of Shiva and Shakti as they come from the culture that you come from. Just saying a bit more about what Shakti and Shiva means to you, and this union that is possible within.
Okay. So thank you, Shakti. I'll dive right in. That was such a wonderful and detailed background. In the Indian tradition, Shiva, and in the Hindu tradition, Shiva and Shakti are considered deities and beings that one can worship, but they are also essential principles. And for the sake of this leadership model, I have drawn of Shiva and Shakti as essential principles of reality, of life as we experience it. So up front, I'd like to say that one doesn't have to be religious to understand Shiva and Shakti and work with this model of leadership that I've outlined in this book. Shiva and Shakti are the primordial duality upon which all creation is based and gets created. So there is oneness, as we all understand it and know from so many different traditions. And yet for that one energy, which in the yogic tradition is considered also very conscious and intelligent, for that one energy to create and know itself, it becomes the two. It splits itself into two aspects, so to speak. And then it is the creative tension between these two aspects, the interplay of these two aspects that generates the energy and the life force of creation, and out of which things are then manifested. So much like a child, the unified oneness, the supreme intelligence of life, which is whole and complete, divides into two. So one aspect of that is consciousness, it's pure awareness, which is Shiva. It is the stillness, the ground of being that simply is. And it is therefore the witness of all that then happens. And the other principle is Shakti, that is its creative, dynamic force that then goes on to enter into union with this awareness and stillness, and uses the ground of that awareness and stillness to anchor itself even as it goes about dynamically creating in this wonderful Leela and cosmic play all the different possibilities within itself. The Shakti creates and becomes and then enters into, and Shiva and Shakti enter into that creation and enjoy this myriad multiplicity that is creation. So inside every unit of creation, whether it is an atom or a molecule or a cell or a tissue a organ or a body, every single thing that exists as a unit of creation contains within it these two in union, in a very unique combination of Shiva and Shakti. And in a way, it's not too different from the idea of the Tao from the Chinese tradition, which says there is the Tao which contains within it the yin and the yang. The difference in the yogic tradition is that we are so devotional in our cultural nature as ancient Indian people that we would like to engage with these two principles as beings who we can enter into, we can have deep love towards, and discovery through that kind of relationship is that indeed these two principles are responsive. You enter into relationship with them and they do indeed, and they have a beingness. So if you wish to go there, you're welcome to also enter into relationships as if they were beings. That would be Shiva and Shakti as a very quick primer. Do you want me to say more?
Yeah, Nilima, let me ask you. I'm very interested to ask you. When I shared now with the listeners your description of the book and this understanding of the masculine that, as you so rightly said, has caused a lot of problems in our world. This outdated idea of masculinity, which is very hierarchical and individualistic and militaristic. It stands in such contrast to the principle of the masculine that you're referring to now here as the Shiva principle, that is stillness and presence and being. Can you say more about that? And then is there a way that you can foresee that in this balance of Shakti and Shiva and leadership that we can actually start to invoke more that deeper quality of the masculine, which is held by Shiva, and I think you're pointing to a way by saying that we can enter into relationship with this deeper aspect of the masculine that in the Hindu tradition is called Shiva.
Yes, so about if we think of Shiva as the highest manifestation of the masculine, the divine masculine, then it feels as if the masculine as we see and know it in our ordinary reality is quite the opposite of that. So there is the divine aspect of the divine masculine, which is Shiva. There is the divine feminine, which is Shakti. And then when they manifest through us in the world, are able to channel them and manifest them to the extent to embody and manifest these capacities, they can get fallen almost. They become their shadow side. They can get deeply distorted, and that's why polarity, not just as a masculine feminine polarity, but each one also has another light and shadow side. So when the masculine falls into unconsciousness, it then expresses cruelty and aggression and violence, and quite the opposite of what we would associate with the stillness and awareness of a Shiva. And similarly, when you look at the feminine, especially we women who are in the work of awakening to the feminine and really reaching for the feminine, we would tend to see only the gifts of the feminine, the positives of the divine feminine, which would be empathy and gentleness and inclusion, creativity. And yet, that too has its dark side if it is used unconsciously. It can be abused, and it can become smothering, sentimental, manipulative, irrational, unfocused, right? So when we are supremely conscious and when we are in our awakened state, we can manifest Shiva as the pure masculine principle and Shakti as the pure feminine principle. But in us, until we are fully awakened and whole, they will be sorted and they will show up quite differently.
Yes, and so what I'm just hearing on a personal level, in terms of our awareness of how we're living our lives, that it takes dedication and practice to really purify our relationship with both the masculine and the feminine, so that we don't just simply live through the what you're calling the shadow or the distorted masculine or feminine in our lives, which is what most of the world will be unconsciously living. I would imagine that you would agree that it takes a certain, personal dedication to cultivate that finer state of being.
Absolutely, which is why in yoga it's called sadhana, as you well know, that our default state is, when we are born and we are socialized in our current context, the default state is to be unconscious or unawakened or asleep. And then it is through this kind of purification and conscious evolution that we can become more prepared to receive and embody and manifest the purer aspects of Shiva and Shakti. That's the work. That's the work we do on ourselves.
Yes, and so when we're talking about Shiva and Shakti in leadership, then I imagine the leader with their own sadhana, their own personal dedicated practice, prioritizing the importance of cultivating these inner states of alignment to then be able to bring that into leadership in the world.
Yes, so maybe this is a good time for me to talk a little bit about the first two elements of Shakti leadership. So the model of Shakti leadership, I've called it the 5 elements of Shakti leadership. And the first two are presence and Shakti. So to be a conscious leader, the first thing you need to do is get out of your ego, your ordinary consciousness, and access the state of presence, which is in a way the stillness or the Shiva consciousness, the still voice within, the stillness within, the pure awareness within. So only when you are anchored in presence, and for that you have to learn to step back from your head, your heart, and your gut. The centers we need to be, we tend to be lost in because we're so busy self-promoting or self-defending or fearing or worrying. We tend to get lost in one of these 3 centers, our head, our heart, or our gut. And so to be able to catch ourselves and step back and enter into this, what I feel as my spine, when I'm nice and erect, and I can really just feel the stillness and the anchoredness of my spine. And I go back into that and I just have a sense of pure being, that I am here now. Regardless of all what's going on around me, I am here now. It's like entering the eye of the storm of life. This is where your stillness and calm is. So that is presence, to be able to have that kind of detachment from what's going on. That is presence. And when you are in a state of presence, which takes a certain practice, and there's a very simple 10-minute practice I have made available for free on my book's website, shaktileadershipbook.com. Just the practice of this, how you work with your body, your breath, your mind, and your heart and how you step back into the state of presence, from there, you're now able to perceive, sense a different kind of flow and a different kind of energy that is part of this presence. So this presence is not just a vacuum. There is a power in it. There is an energy in it, and there is a force in it which is ever so subtle but ever so real. And you have to learn how to tap into that and breathe into that and allow that to breathe with you. And very slowly but surely, you allow that Shakti, that power of presence, to then come through your senses to refine you, to help you understand your context better, become more context aware, become more aware of your own inner state, have the resilience to be able to respond rather than be in an egoic reactive mode. So it's a totally different power base when you are standing in presence, and that power base is your Shakti. And so when you're flowing from this Shakti, you are now getting things done at a totally different speed and to a totally different quality. And it almost feels miraculous and magical, the kind of synchronicities that happen, because this Shakti is really at another level of consciousness from our ego, and things happen in a totally different timeline, which is almost real-time, immediate. It's kind of a quantum shift. So I don't know if that answers your question.
That's beautiful, Nilima. And you said that you wanted to mention the first two principles you talk about in the book. Did you talk about both now?
That is presence and Shakti.
Okay, wonderful. So now,
for me,
of course,
presence is Shiva.
Yes. I am now curious to whether you would be willing to share with us the other principles as well, because you said there are 5 principles.
Sure. 5 elements, yes. Like you have the Panchabhuta, right? The 5 elements of creation. Okay. There are 5 elements to this model. So when you're in presence, you are in a way accessing your Shiva state. From there, you tap into the power of presence, Shiva's power, which is Shakti. And then when you flow with that, this Shakti now leads your further evolution and development. And the next thing you have to cultivate to come into your full power is to become a whole person, psychologically whole. You have to integrate your ego and your shadow self. And I really draw from the idea of transactional analysis that we have a parent self, an adult self, and a child self within us. And for us to come into our adulthood, a full aware adult, an aware adult stands in their adult consciousness and knows how to access the parent self when needed and access the child self when needed. So I see our ego self very much as our parent self, you know, the way we've been socialized, our do's and don'ts. And then I see the shadow, in a way, parts of our self that remain juvenile and undeveloped, almost like the child. And that's why it's gone into the shadow. And yet, when we know how to become our own parent and become our own child, it's like you have integrated your parent and child nature, your ego and your shadow self. That is the first level of wholeness. So when you talk about the soulmate within, and we really want to go to saying, if I'm a woman, how can I find my inner man? This is where I was struck by Carl Jung's comment that integrating the anima and the animus is like the master level of individuation, whereas the apprentice piece is to integrate the ego and the shadow. So this is how I have understood it, that first I have to, on my journey to psychological wholeness, I have to embrace my shadow, my child self, my wounds, etc. I have to become my own mother and my own child. And then I've come into my adulthood. From that adulthood, I am now able to integrate my inner man, if I'm a woman. And if I'm a man, then I'm able to integrate my inner woman. That's like the masterpiece that Jung talks about. So I call this psychological wholeness, which is the third element of Shakti leadership. I call this holy family reunion. Like you have to become your own father, your own mother, your own child, your own beloved.
Beautiful. And
so that is the third.
I know.
That is the third.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to go into the other two, or you have any questions
Please.
on this one?
I hold back on my questions. I would love to have you share all five first.
Okay. The fourth element is called flexibility, which is once I become psychologically whole, I'm present, I'm flowing with my true power, then when the situation demands a particular response, I'm able to flex to that. So if something requires a more masculine style of leadership, I can show up with that without losing my presence and my wholeness. If a situation requires a more feminine response, I can flex to that. And there may be some situations which require a kind of combination of both, and I can be that equally. So the ability to flex, the capacity to flex between your masculine and your feminine, and if may I add, your parent self and your child self as well. You know, I call this, you've got to be, it's not just about being tough love. Tough is the masculine and love is the feminine, but equally to be the wise fool. Have the wisdom of your parent self, and also have the foolishness and the playfulness of, you know, of your child self. I think we're missing that foolish child piece a lot in all the narrative on leadership out there today. So that's another ability to flex between your wise self and your foolish self, between your tough self and your love self, right? So that is flexing, knowing appropriately how to play which part of your being as the situation, leadership moment calls for. Without losing presence, without losing Shakti flow, and essential wholeness. Not being stuck in any of these, knowing how to return to wholeness and how to play from it all over again. Okay? So that is the fourth element of Shakti leadership, flexibility. The fifth element of Shakti leadership is congruence. If you want to be a conscious leader, you have to not just be whole and flexible, you've got to ask yourself, where am I going with all this? What am I putting all this wholeness and power in service of? Am I on purpose? So congruence is the element that says, do I know my dharma? Do I know my purpose? And am I on purpose? Am I aligned with it? Am I congruent in all my actions on the inside and on the outside? Right? So the congruence piece is where it's no longer about self-mastery, but it's about selfless service. I bring all this self-mastery to serve the world and to be a force for good, to be a channel for dharma, for good and for evolution to further itself.
Beautiful. I so see that directionality that it's ultimately coming to the place of knowing what is the calling for you as a leader. What are you called to give as the movement of service, and then just feel in that both the quality of Shiva and Shakti. Shiva in the sense of just a pure presence. There's not a somebody that's trying to achieve a goal for themselves, And there's also the quality of Shakti as the pure movement of life, creating what life wants to create through the particular vessel that you are.
Yes, beautifully said.
Hmm.
And something that came to me where I combined the Vesika Pisces symbol with the principles of the Purushartha, that the pursuit or the objects of human life, what is the purpose of human life in the yogic tradition, there are four themes there. There is Kama, Artha, Dharma, Moksha. I don't know if you've heard of that in your yogic sadhana, but it so beautifully maps onto the idea of the masculine and the feminine coming together. So the pursuit or the objects of human life, the first is meaningful work, Artha, which is very much your masculine energy. And the other is Kama, which is having loving relationships, that is your feminine energy. And where the two come together and interconnect in that Vesika Pisces symbol, the two interconnecting circles, in that fish-shaped overlap of the two is where your sweet spot, your dharma is. So your dharma is something which will be the perfect combination or union of your meaningful work and your loving relationship. It will all come together to become your dharma. And when you are located in your dharma, that seat of pleasure, it's almost like the yoni when you look at it, you will have it as a portal to the fourth, which is the moksha, the freedom, the joy beyond duality, and you're fully in connection with the greater force of life itself then. It's serving you as you are serving it.
Beautiful. I love that that description. I think that's very valuable, Nilima, as a way of thinking about our direction, because I see that in the Western world we can get so confused about the idea of being on purpose, and how easily that, especially as leaders, there's so much pressure in the Western world, especially to, be on purpose in your leadership, and then we can get confused as to what purpose is really about, and start to get more and more contracted into an egoic state. And here we're talking about something much bigger, a bigger understanding of what purpose really is.
Yes, because we work with the idea of, when we say dharma, we're talking about swa-dharma, which is my personal dharma, and your swa-dharma has to be perfectly congruent and arises out of your swa-bhav. Bhav is your nature. So swa-bhav is your personal nature. So only when you are aligned in who you essentially are, your intrinsic unique nature, your own personhood, and from there in your personal dharma towards your personal dharma. So the swabhav and the swadharma are completely interlinked.
Beautiful. Nilima, I want to shift focus slightly to a question that we've spoken about, which is the principle of the mother, and the mother's understanding of the four rungs of love. So we've spoken here about the importance of the principle of love as in leadership. But I so loved your explanation of that. Can you say more about the mother on the four rungs of love and bring that into the conversation for us?
So basically this whole thing is about all of life. It feels as if we are moving from one level of love to the next level of love. That's just what it means to wake up and grow up and to become all that we can be, right? If we go from this very contracted place until we can evolve into this fullness of all that is. So if everything is essentially love, then when we are, at first, Mother says, one loves only when one is loved. Okay, so then something arises in me, because this is like a mother loving you. A mother caretakes you, and therefore you love her because you're being taken care of, right? Next, one loves spontaneously, but one wants to be loved in return. This is very much the next level of love, where we are entering our adolescence, where, we find someone who we project our animus on, or if you're a man, you project your anima, and then there's this sudden wonder about this other person who can be somehow a partner to you, and this love arises from you in this deeply erotic kind of way towards another. But one wants to be loved in return. You want the other person to validate you, and this whole romance, the idea of romantic love, is where all this comes from, right? And she says, then there is the next rung of love. One loves even if one is not loved back, but one still wants one's love to be accepted. So even if you're able to sublimate your love for another person, the lover in this case, and not want to be loved back, and you're happy enough that you can feel love for this person, but at some level, even if that person doesn't love you back, you are hoping that at least they will accept the fact that you love them, that they can see they are loved by you, right? And we're still kind of giving our power away to this other person then, because our love is kind of conditional to their acceptance of our love. And then she says, finally, one loves purely and simply, without any other need or joy than that of loving. So by this time, if you have reached this place, the fact that you can feel love is its own gift and grace and end.
It's such a beautiful principle in the context of the soulmate within, and also in the external manifestation of that in the dance of relationship with another, to consider the possibility of being deeply fulfilled simply through the loving, and not because the love is received or reciprocated.
Yes. And that is the heart of this Shakti, the soulmate within. All the teachings, all the spiritual paths, I'm particularly reminded of the Sufi tradition. Rumi talks about the beloved all the time, and all of us poetry, and we think he's saying it to someone else, but really he is saying this to love itself. So is the experience of love itself. And when I can experience love for what it is and allow myself to drink so deeply from that experience and let it satisfy me so completely, then I don't need another person to give me that experience.
And then also to be able to see that when we do have this experience of love being activated apparently through another, that really it's just that the meeting somehow enables us to see what is already there, which is inherent in us, and doesn't need another, but can overflow in this dance of meeting.
Yes, and I read this book by Trebbie Johnson called The World is a Waiting Lover, and I loved what she said, that whoever you have fallen in love with, who has awakened you to the experience of love, is your escort to the beloved. He's not the beloved, he's the escort. And because I have a background in biochemistry and immunology, I studied the immune system and how it's through the antigen entering your body that your antibodies get stimulated, and then you develop the immunity and resilience and the goodness of something, right? So it's as if we need to be triggered and initiated by another. That person just comes as a gift to, who lights us, who awakens us, who initiates us. But once they initiate us to that experience, which really is our response to their initiation, once that response in us has happened, right, we sensitized. Now we have it in us. The flow has been opened and activated in us. The gates have been opened for us inside. Now it's for us to work that gate, that portal, and continue to develop it and draw from there, instead of continuing to be dependent on this other person, thinking that's where it came from.
And Nilima, this brings me back to the topic of Shakti Shiva leadership, because I see, and myself and also people around me, that we are all being called, as we give ourselves more to a path of consciousness and awakening, we're called to be leaders in the world. But that movement of leadership is it can appear to be alone, of course, because one is walking in front, not because you are following what the world is offering, but because you're moving from an inner light. So as there's a recognition of the love which is already there through the catalyzing of the meeting with the other, then we walk with the light and the love that comes from within, which I think is what really takes us to being the beloved, regardless of whatever our partner is giving back to us. And would you agree that that is really what's required in leadership as well, is that we be willing to be the light, to live the direction that we see from within, regardless of what the world is, giving us as feedback, or as, confirmation that we're doing okay, that it really comes from another place.
Oh yes, definitely, and I like the way you just put that. It's when we are lit up from within, it's a combination of all those 5 elements of Shakti leadership. You have access presence, you're flowing with your own power, your own Shakti, and then you are whole, you're flexible, you're congruent because you found your dharma and you're fueled by these 5 elements. Each of these 5 elements are giving you Shakti and fuel, right? So you are kind of whole and complete and a power of one, so to speak. And you're able to know why you are here and what you have to do, even as you know how to be open enough for feedback. There is a role other people play in our lives, and I've explained that in this book as well, that no one is your enemy, no one is your friend, all alike are your teachers. All these people around us are mirrors of different aspects of our own self that we may or may not have fully integrated. So our growth is continuing and continuous, and we can always become more and more whole. So to stay open to feedback, but not to be troubled by it, not to get into a I'm not okay about it, from a place of presence, to be able to, from the wholeness really, be able to receive the feedback when it comes and continue to grow from there, to take all that as a challenge for your further growth, or to use even friendship and help as someone who is available to coach you to go further. So yes, we have to be self-driven, self-motivated, but there's a purpose for the constellation around us, the people around us, and they play a very beautiful game with us.
Beautiful, Nilima. Last question I have for you. Would you say that leadership is something which is the domain of just a few, or is leadership something which is that all of us are called to on some or other level?
So I think at a minimum there is self-leadership, and regardless of who you are, each one of us is called to do that. We have to each lead ourselves into awakening, into all that we can be, into manifesting our potential. For that, we require leadership, and we cannot be victims of our circumstances. We have to be leaders of who we become and who we are. So at a minimum, each of us is called to leadership. Leadership is a must. It's not really something you can do without if you want to truly make the most of life. How many of us are called to then lead more than ourselves? That, I think, is a matter of the soul you are and the soul work you came to do in this lifetime. And if your soul work is to actually lead a collective to outcome, if that is what your inner voice tells you to do, then to comfortably be able to step into that role and take charge of that collective. So not everyone may be called, but if it is yours to do, then you have no choice but to do it. Otherwise, you'll be whacked into doing it, as the hero's journey keeps teaching us. There's a crisis that will make you claim your destiny if you're an unwilling hero.
Nilima, thank you so much for that, and that, I think, that final encouragement to take, to acknowledge that if we are being called as leaders, then that's a path that we have to walk. Feels like a beautiful place to conclude the interview, and I just want to encourage the listeners to go and have a look at shaktileadershipbook.com, which is where the book is available. I'll spell it for you: SHAKTILEADERSHIP book.com. And Nilima, thank you so much for your time and that beautiful, powerful, generous sharing that you've given us here. Feels like many pathways and gateways have been opened through your sharing. Is there any final words that you'd like to say about this topic before we conclude?
I think just to remind everyone, including myself, that yes, we yearn to find the soulmate within. We want to find the masterpiece, and you don't leapfrog there until you have first integrated your shadow stuff, reclaimed your child, and become your own mother or your own father. Get that work done first. Otherwise, the search for the beloved can end up bringing into your life all kinds of, if you're a woman, you'll attract a dark man. It can backfire. So become an adult first psychologically before you look for the beloved.
Would you say that one needs to fully become an adult and have all your shadow integrated before there is space to engage with another?
That would be ideal, but that's not how the messy life works, as we know. But I would say, I would say each one kind of helps build the other. So essentially, become your own mother, and then become your own beloved. But if you end up finding a man before you have become your own mother, then the pain of that relationship and the, that will force you to find your mother. So that's the story of Persephone, right? That she is in the netherworld by Hades, and that's why Demeter has to descend and reunite with her daughter. So it's only when mother and daughter are reunited that the dark man becomes healed, so to speak, within. So in Shakti terms, we talk about Durga, who is this virginal goddess who is busy fighting Mahishasura, who is the Asura, the demon, who's a very sexual being, who desires her. So there's this war between the virginal Durga energy in the woman and the kind of aggressive sexual masculine energy of Mahishasura. But once she slays that demon and she completes that journey, she goes back to becoming Gauri, Parvati, and she sits alongside Mahesha. So the man, Mahish, has become Mahesh, which is Shiva, right? So it's interesting. Do you see that?
Yes, yes. I also see that how that metaphor brings us right back to where we began, speaking about the masculine principle, the shadow masculine principle, as it is manifested in the world, that we could unconsciously lead from, and that there is a real invitation to go on a journey of, one could say, a journey of initiation to come into right relationship with the masculine, and not just to unconsciously, live the shadow aspect.
Absolutely, absolutely. So beautifully said, Shakti.
Nilima, thank you so much for your sharing, and thank you, listeners, for being with us today. Go and have a look at Nilima's book, ShaktiLeadershipBook.com is where you'll find it. And thank you for joining me on this interview on the Soulmate Within Summit, and wishing you all joy in the discovery with all these beautiful presentations.
Thank you so much, Shakti. Shanti.